The AWS Developers Podcast is in Las Vegas this week, and we are debriefing AWS reInvent. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for downloading the AWS Developers Podcast. We're available in all good podcast applications. Actually, if the AWS Developers Podcast is in your app, then it's a good podcast application. We're on YouTube and on the web as well. Today, I have a special guest to debrief the AWS reInvent conference that just finished here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Corey Quinn, thank you for spending a bit of time with us, with the listeners of the podcast. People probably know you from social media, from your own podcast, The Last Week in AWS, the newsletter. Your job is to tackle AWS bills, and that's how you would define what you do?
That is one way to define what I do. It turns out that when I'm talking to folks, describing me is really weird. I fit into a lot of very strange buckets, but not ideally. Thank you for having me here, by the way, to indulge my ongoing love affair with the sound of my own voice. Although after reInvent, it's a little raspy, but we're going to work on through it anyway.
Actually, that's a good radio voice.
Exactly. I have a face for radio too, which is why we're not doing this on video.
We are not on video for this. Same for me after 5 days of conference. Your job makes you an acute observer of the cloud industry and AWS. You're here at the reInvent since many years. What are the trends that you identify this year?
Oh, dear Lord.
Where to start?
Frankly, what I do, you're right, I focus on bills. And when it comes to cloud, cost and architecture are the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I started off by paying a lot of attention to, anything that has an economic impact. Well, it turns out that's basically everything in the cloud. So you have to pay attention to this stuff, whether you want to or not. At first, I wanted to, and then more not, but you have to keep going once you start. The trends at reInvent this year have been fascinating from watching things shift back around. Last year was, to be direct, a little heavy on Gen AI. Just a smidgen. I mean, I'm told that it's no longer pronounced AI. It's AI as a feral corporate scream. But there was a lot of other stuff too. It feels like it wasn't the cavalcade of announcements that you often would see in the olden days, where Andy Jassy would get on stage during his keynote, take a giant breath, rattle off 400 service announcements, and start gasping for air at the end when he ran out. There are fewer announcements that they seem to be more focused on certain areas. The stuff that Matt Garman started with this year, which I thought was a fascinating way of approaching it, feels like it's going back to the olden days of AWS when there was a strong focus on service primitives. S3 is rock solid. So there are a couple of very interesting things that came out. S3 tables, which reaffirms that everything is in fact a database if you hold it wrong.
So it's not Route 53?
Awesome. So I've been saying for years that Route 53 is a database because I'm, professionally annoying. But the first draft of that joke was about S3, not Route 53. And I changed it last minute.
And you were inspired because otherwise it would be obsolete.
There were a few ways that, even at the time, that were not ridiculous of using S3 or any object store as a database, but using text records in Route 53 is objectively wrong. Don't do it. It's a good joke because it's ridiculous. When people take the joke too far and it becomes real, then it's, okay, now I'm actively causing harm to people's environments. Let's back off from that. But yeah, most people, I hope, understand that. The focus on things like DSQL, the ability to have effectively a database that's like, CAP theorem, rather not. Just going to pretend that doesn't exist because we can do that now, is amazing.
I was surprised with that because to solve that problem, they need time synchronization between different regions. It's super hard to do. And Matt Garman just said, we have a bunch of satellites, and with atomic clocks, how many companies can offer a network of satellites with atomic clock to solve this type of problems? I was really amazed.
Because Google did this with Spanner years ago. But the reason that I've always avoided and counseled other people to avoid it is, okay, let's say that you don't want to continue using a given vendor, but they're the only one that can do a thing, then if to migrate off, you have to completely reimagine your data architecture, which is non-trivial, let's put it that way. Now at least there's a theoretical alternate option. I think having AWS able to do this will benefit both sides of that particular fence, because you want people to be your customer because what you're offering is terrific, not because they don't have any other choice.
So what else? S3, the fundamentals, the building blocks, the primitives of the cloud.
Oh, yes. And you want to talk about a return to its root. Then you had Andy Jassy get on stage. He's the CEO of Amazon taking time to come to reInvent. I think he missed us, which is great. Now, if there was any justice in the world, given that he's at Amazon now, he would have been interrupted by an unskippable ad midway through. But then, oh, that's right, they had guest speakers come up, and I guess those sort of are ads in a keynote now, aren't they, from a certain point of view? No, but the speakers were terrific. The commentary was great, and for better or worse, when people get on stage at a reInvent conference, I'm not left with the impression that they're just making things up because it sounds good or the market demands it. There were fewer future-looking announcements, which I thought was great. One of my personal favorites, and I understand this is not for everyone, but Monday night live with Peter DeSantis, or as I think of it, surprise computer science lecture with Professor Peter DeSantis, because it always goes down that path. I love that.
To the design of the CPU chips and why we are doing things, how we bring electricity to data centers.
And what I love about this is because on some level, no customer cares. They do not give a crap how you get these things to do the things that they do. But it's a talk that's not there to sell people things. It is purely for love of the engineering. And that's motivating.
My little heart of geek loves that. Even if I don't have to know when I launch an EC2 instance what's underneath, I love to know these things and to understand a bit how it works.
He ripped a sheet off of this giant server that was a Trainium 2 monstrosity thing that honestly I think it was just a giant refrigerator with the delusions of grandeur. It's great. I'm never going to get one of those at my house. I don't have a loading dock that can take it. But the fact that there's this level of thought and engineering and customization that goes into it. I mean, I think of the days when I worked at places where we had our own data centers. Our biggest concern was we kept forgetting to replace failed hard drives. Amazon is undisputably better at that level of problem solving than almost any other company in the world. Only a few could claim to challenge that. There's no contest. I wound up building a Kubernetes earlier this year. That's right, only one, not Kubernetes, Kubernetes in my spare room out of Raspberry Pi. Yes, that's how I pluralize it as well. And I've forgotten somehow just how finicky and annoying hardware is. Or with some fool who I don't know how they would have gotten into my house, trips over a power cable and takes half the thing down and corrupts a storage system.
Because we need power for the vacuum cleaner.
Yes. Data centers are not places for the professionally clumsy. I learned that one the fun way myself.
Werner's keynote is a bit the same. It's like an academic course about how to architecture systems, and I saw many comments on social media about Professor Werner explaining how to architect software solutions.
It's always interesting watching discussions around how to architect things because AWS has a very particular challenge in this space. In isolation, if you're designing something from the ground up, here's how we want to build this thing. Here's how we make it resilient. Here's how we ensure that it can survive any AZ or regional outage. But you talk to customers, and so much of what they have is pre-existing. Even when I'm building stuff myself, my big question is, can this even work? Once you get it up and working, it suddenly becomes revenue-bearing, and now I'm going to rebuild this thing and make it work in all of these different places simultaneously in resilient, deployable, scalable ways. Well, you can't turn it off to do that necessarily. And things build upon that complexity. It gets harder and harder to retrofit that sort of approach. The only way to get it reliably is the way that you folks do, which is to design it from the beginning that way. But it is such a luxury for some folks to be able to do that. I wish I was in a place I could get away with it.
One of the big surprises during Matt's keynote as well was to have Apple on stage.
I am astounded that you folks got Apple in to do a testimonial because nobody has friends at Apple. We just used to have friends that we sort of lost touch with when they went to go work at Cupertino. Exactly. Then they come back. It's like, oh my God, Stephen, I thought you were dead. Yeah, it's amazing. It's great to be able to catch up with folks there, but they don't give a testimonial or a reference for anyone about anything. I feel like they only will begrudgingly admit that they do work on computers. It is wild. Their entire corporate messaging strategy involves a vow of silence. But AWS got them on stage to tell a story about these things. And a lot of it admittedly was around machine learning. I think that pre-announcing Trainium 3 coming at the end of next year. That means reinvent. I think that was not potentially the best approach, because you're trying to tell people how great Trainium 2 is. I'm not in that space. I wouldn't know. I'll take it in faith that sure, it's fine. But Trainium 3 is going to be even better.
But you have to wait 1 year.
It feels like the Osborne effect from the 80s, where Osborne Computer was selling the Osborne 1, and he starts talking about how great the Osborne 2 is, so everyone's response naturally was, oh, I'll wait for that then. And the company died. They never released an Osborne 2. But you have to sell what you're selling today. And I will admit, last year with a lot of the Gen AI releases, it felt like in preview, coming soon. This is amazing, but don't trust it. If it goes wrong, it's not our fault, which is sort of how I read preview to mean. But things being in general availability now, that's valuable, because that is, from my perspective at least, and you have never caused me to question it, when AWS releases something to general availability, it means that you're standing behind it across almost every axis. And when things are in preview, they are subject to change. APIs can move around. CloudFormation might not support it yet. But once something is generally available in this era, it's solid. You can build a business on it, and you can trust that. I hope. You're staring at me like, well, we have some deprecate. Now a word from our sponsor, who is deprecating 4 more services. No, please don't do that.
I was thinking about that, but I won't go into
No.
that. But that's something new also this year at AWS, that we start to officially say, okay, this service, we are going to maintain it, just keep the lights on, but no
I am
more
a
using
fan of AWS doing deprecations. I am not so much a fan of them dripping them out throughout the year, like round them up and tell me what is going on and why you're doing it. Forrest Brazil made a great observation. Yeah, just explain the justification. Because you folks have so many services at this point that we have long since passed the point where I can talk incredibly convincingly about services that don't exist and not get called out on it by Amazon employees. Because who knows? Who knows if that's a real thing? And customers at this point aren't crying out for more complex ways to run containers or whatnot. They have the primitives they're working with, and they want those to get better. But okay, this is now a specific container running service targeted at squirrels. Great, awesome, good for you. Like a few years later, it turns out squirrels were not using this in quite the way we envisioned. It didn't catch on. We're going to turn it off. That's awesome. The problem is people never pay as much attention as you would hope they would. So there's this sense of, oh, well, you turned off containers for squirrels. You're going to turn off S3 next? No, you're not. But it's hard to communicate that.
It's about perception and communication. We were not good at communicating these services that are not going to be maintained anymore.
Well, in the earlier days, you folks had the luxury of not having to communicate things. You never had to talk about what was coming. It was just, we have built this thing. We think you're going to like it. It's available today. Here you go. You are at a size and scale now where you have to start telegraphing a lot of these things for a variety of reasons, because there are constraints and pressures on you. And that means things get pre-announced more. Things get talked up a lot more. Historically, marketing was not the same type of job at AWS, because it was almost a company ethos that you understated everything that you did. That doesn't hold true. In 2025 almost, we're now at a point where everyone is talking loudly about the things that they do. You're left with no choice. You're not doing anything wrong by doing this, but I miss the culture that historically gave rise to understatement.
So one of the trends you observe, you tell it's the return to the foundation, to the API, the primitives that allows customers to build solutions in the cloud. Anything else that was of interest this week in your eyes, according to what is important to you, your customer, and the general cloud industry?
Well, honestly, the thing I notice with my customers is, let's be very real here. Everyone is doing something with generative AI, but they tend to look more like experiments. The concern that customers have said that I think this week did a pretty good job of addressing is, yeah, this is great. We're doing these Gen AI experiments, but that whole business that we run on the internet,
we still need to run
the infrastructure that you folks do. Could you maybe talk about that? Which is hard, because it's not like EC2 is exciting. It's not. Great. We've made EC2 even better, and it is where customers are running a tremendous amount of things. But we're going to talk about virtualization and how computers work in that environment. Yes, we've done that for 15 years. It's become boring. Boring is good. Gen AI is interesting from the perspective of being able to, I guess, turn a lot of preconceived notions on their head. But the new foundation models for Amazon Nova, for example, I kicked the tires on that a little bit when I had a few spare minutes. It is better than I expected it to be, which I know sounds like I'm damning with incredibly faint praise. But, like, for example, I tend to be, again, professionally obnoxious. Someone comes out with a new foundation model. One of the first things I do is I get it to rank the U.S. presidents by absorbency. Like, and some of them will just go ahead and do it, and some will argue with me well, absorbency is not the proper way to measure presidential performance. Hey, don't push your politics on me, robot. Do it. And I can generally talk them into doing it because it's objectively ridiculous. But they're getting more creative. They're getting more interesting. And the economics of Nova are roughly an order of magnitude below that of Claude's foundation models. Now, whether the economics are important at the moment for Gen AI remains to be seen, because step one is always, can we build the thing? Does it work? Does it solve a business need?
And is there a business case, a use case for that?
Or even if it can work, because great, it works, but it's expensive. Awesome. We can work with that. We can get that down. We can work on the economies to make this go. But it doesn't work. Then what it costs doesn't matter. It's going to get turned off because, well, it doesn't work, but it's cheap is not a valid story. And it's a delicate thing to message, because one of the primary advantages of the Amazon models is the economics of it. So nearly as good, but less expensive, while valuable from a certain point of view, is kind of a weak headline for this is why you should use it. People like the aspirational stuff. They want the tentpole things. Amazon Q is obviously seeing a lot of enhancements. I do increasingly feel like the coding assistants are becoming less and less differentiated, more and more commoditized. It's more or less a very fancy way of rapidly copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, which, let's be honest, is how I and most other people tend to do an awful lot of our programming. They're fantastic. But there is confusion as well, because Amazon Q as a developer agent is awesome. Amazon Q as a chatbot in the console, some of it is getting better.
It's getting better.
It now, for example, something I like and I use it for, I know, me endorsing a Gen AI thing, is you can ask it questions about your spend, and it will deep link into a pre-configured Cost Explorer view to highlight what it's talking about. This was recently released. I got to talk about it in my talk on Thursday.
I was going to come to that. Not only you're a cloud analyst, but you're a speaker as well. So you had
I am a
talk
whole
here.
bunch of things. Yes, I'd never fit anywhere.
In box. So what was your talk about?
It was about changes that AWS has put out in recent service enhancements that they've been working on for quite a while, that came out in the past week or two, about cloud financial management. I had Matt Burke and Bowen Wang as my two AWS co-speakers, presumably two of them, because they weren't convinced one of them could overpower me quickly enough if I went off script. But no, it was an absolute blast to work with them on that talk. I was very flattered to be invited, and I would do that again in a heartbeat, just because getting on stage to talk about these things that I'm working on, that I'm passionate about, and sort of understanding what it looks like from a glimpse of inside the AWS beast that builds these things is always interesting and informative. And when I learn about something new, one of the first things I want to do is tell people about it.
What is this new capability in the console? I missed that.
There are several capabilities that came out. Many of them, to be frank, are only interesting to people who work on this all day long. You can find those people by the dead look in their eyes, because when you stare into the abyss of the AWS bill and the cost and usage report, it stares back into you. But something that I think everyone can appreciate is looking at spend along different axes in Cost Explorer of, okay, what region is my usage in, which project tag is causing the most driver of spend.
That exists already in the console now, is it? No,
it absolutely does. And you can click, it used to be you just have to click around 50 times in Cost Explorer to narrow it down. Now when you ask Q a question and it answers it, ideally correctly, it provides a deep link to the end result of all of those clicks and dropping around. That is something I would use, as opposed to its original in preview support for cost data. It would just be able to tell you the top categories, and that was it, with no nuance. It's, I can just click on the billing console and see that myself, and then we're good. I need to go a little deeper on that. And it keeps improving, but a lot of the improvements that are coming to Q in the console are things that, well, what was it doing before? Like it now is aware of which service page you're looking at was a perfect example of that. Like why are you popping up all the time if you don't know what I'm actually doing in this thing? Great, more context. That's a good thing. Q for business. I haven't played with that very much. But those are three expressions of Q we've gone over right now without even touching on some of the command line stuff that it can do and the rest. It's become a brand. When's the breakfast cereal come out? It's
Q for
branding
breakfast.
is hard.
But does that mean that GenAI will replace the cloud cost consultant?
It's a good question. I think that
Like
there's
it might
always a question
replace developer. You know, there is this fear as well that Q developer or the coding
there's a
assistants will
lot
replace
of
developer.
fear. There's a lot of AI across the board about jobs that are eroding. There's the story of will it make people more efficient? I believe so.
Yeah, definitively.
But here's a perfect example. I write a weekly newsletter last week in AWS in my first language spoken at home, which is sarcasm. And it turns out that when you're loud in public, the foundation models out there tend to be able to pick up and understand what your voice sounds like and imitate it. So I've had it do a bunch of, here's a bunch of AWS releases, talk about them the way that Corey Quinn would. And what I've learned when hearing it come out from somewhere else is one of the things I didn't realize that makes my whole shtick work is that I'm usually getting at an underlying point. I'm not just being snarky and obnoxious for the sake of annoying people. That's just a bonus. But when you don't have that inside aspect to it and you don't see how it fits into the larger ecosystem just because you're basically a foundation model, it rings hollow and it's not interesting. There has to be something there to it. I am extraordinarily unconvinced that the rise of AI is going to lead to mass reduction of jobs. It will lead to the changing of jobs. There are a whole lot fewer people in this day and age who make carbon copy paper after the rise of the Xerox machine and so on and so on and so on as technology marches on. But as jobs wind up getting deprecated, for lack of a better term, new jobs arise to take their place. I also find that, for example, Amazon Q developer is terrific at writing a bunch of boilerplate code.
But developers only write code for 1 hour per day.
Well, sure, but the problem is I was building something recently that rounds up all of the news off of the AWS news feed and then puts it out on Blue Sky. I've done this in the open. I built with open source. The challenge I've had with it is clear that none of these systems, Q, GitHub Copilot, Google Gemini, none of these have the ability to reason about the code base, the API, and the rest. They will very confidently tell you that, use the SNS topic that has all of the AWS What's New releases because that's a lot more reliable than the RSS. And I agree, it would be if it existed, but it doesn't. It gave me a whole ARN for it. And, I am 95% sure that doesn't exist because I would have heard about it long before now. If it does, I'm going to basically lose my mind. Just double check. Oh, thank God it doesn't. Phew, it would have been great if it did. It should exist. But yeah.
We should know about it.
I wish I could write code for the world as I imagine it to be instead of the way it really is. But it's the reasoning about these things. It's understanding the interplay behind it. And there's the human element too. Building this thing, one of the challenges of the human element is most humans don't like it when the bot goes haywire and drops 400 announcements in 10 seconds into their feed. Who knew? That's just the way that these things work. And this is a small toy project. This is nowhere near the level of complexity that most folks work on. It's great until it's not. Every engineer on my team that I work with during the day job has at least one or more of these AI coding assistants there. I'm not going to be replacing any of these people with a robot anytime soon. If for nothing else, honestly, they're a better audience for my jokes. But there's a human element that is not going to get replaced.
What I like with these assistants is small side tasks like writing a short shell script or a regular expression, something I can do myself, but it would take 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get it right. And they help me. I have my expression on my shell script in 2 minutes.
Right. Yeah, write out a CloudFormation template that does this. Or awesome. Or an IAM policy. People get worried about that. Like, well, it's going to screw up the IAM policy and give bad permissions. Yeah, so am I. Have you met me? It's fine. That's why we have layers of controls and checks on these things. It solves a lot of the toil and the busy work, and I find that freeing and impressive.
2025 is just around the corner. It's difficult to make prediction, but what do you expect from the cloud, from the AWS cloud in specific until next reInvent?
Oh, the thing I'd stake my hat on, and I can guarantee, is that it's
More
going.
Gen AI?
That's the free space on the bingo card. Yes, but I'm talking about focusing on the details, sweating the details, caring about the basics. The fact that a great example is when I talk to people in various walks of life, sometimes journalists, sometimes wits on the internet, et cetera, and they make jokes about US East 1 being a dumpster fire because it goes down all the time. That joke feels very dated because it just doesn't happen like it used to. Those were always very exciting days when the internet didn't work quite right. And I can't, not to jinx it. I mean, I don't work there. Worst case, it's interesting content. So fine, jinx it, tear it all down, let the world burn. But AWS services and regions and infrastructure is rock solid stable.
I'm touching woods here, but the last large-scale outage.
Well, it's interesting.
A long time ago.
Well, it's fascinating that Peter DeSantis' title is SVP of Utility Computing because that's what it has become. It is a utility. And by that, what I mean is when I'm in the bathroom and I wash my hands afterwards.
You expect to have water.
Well, it never occurs to me when I turn on the faucet that there won't be water. And when I hit the light switch, I'm not sitting there thinking, will it work this time? Except when I'm doing an IoT project because
we are lucky to live in some countries. It's not
absolutely
for everybody like that,
truly,
but we take things for granted.
That is an extraordinarily American-centric perspective. And yes, I've traveled in Italy. I know what the alternative looks like.
I was not thinking about Italy.
There are many places this applies to. Honestly, if you don't like that reference, insert any country you dislike, go for it. It's fine. The joke works most places. The one I'd like to dunk on the most, Ohio, but that's fine.
So to continue on what AWS does quite well since
it's the infrastructure.
15 years.
It's the boring stuff. It's the things that have become trivial. People forget.
That we take for granted.
Yes. It used to be a massive undertaking to wind up getting a website up and reliable. Slash-dotting, which is sort of a stampeding herd problem. Your site gets linked on Slashdot and it goes down because it can't take the traffic. That doesn't happen anymore. I can click around, throw a static site up into S3, put CloudFront in front of it, and show it to the entire world. And I can do it within seconds. Well, it's CloudFront. I can do it within an hour.
Minutes.
And it just works. The infrastructure is there. It's dirt cheap, and I can do it. I know people yell at me for this, with a few clicks of the mouse. That's right, I live for click ops. Sure, at some point you want to turn to infrastructure as code in an idealized world, but messing around in the console and breaking things, well, that's how I learn. I have a dedicated account exclusively for that.
Last week in AWS.com. That's the
it is .com.
That's the website. Last week in AWS, the podcast, newsletter, and subscribe to Corey on Blue Sky and other social media.
Oh yes, I'm off of Twitter. I'm on the Blue Sky now. Yep. QuinnyPig.com.
Thank you, and I will link all that. Thank you, Corey, for sharing your thoughts about AWS reInvent.
And thank you for helping make the events as fantastic as it is, because the fact that I can complain about these things in esoteric, high level perspectives is great, because the stuff that is either invisible or you're complaining about just works. I don't know how to even handle logistics of lunch at a place like this, but everything has just been handled beautifully. The support staff have been phenomenal, top to bottom.
Security, the person that orients you, that
everyone was polite, everyone was
helpful.
Friendly. The only miss that I saw, frankly, across the entire thing is they have a moving, swirling walkway in the Venetian. It is nauseating. There's something about the vertigo element of it. It is the second most disgusting thing I've ever seen at reInvent, the first being my AWS bill after I tried a service one year, but that's a different story. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode until the end. See you next time, next Friday. But now, go build.